Okay, thank you for that. It's time now for our Thursday community segment. We've got Thomas Wasson here talking all things loaded and rolling. Thomas, thank you for being here as always. I think we've got a great topic up for debate today because it's one that's caused a little bit of controversy on LinkedIn. And by a little, I mean a lot, because LinkedIn is, of course, the platform for brokers. And we're talking about the assertion that brokers should pay for detention times. What can you tell us about your thoughts on this?
Oh, this is glorious. Being a carrier and working as a broker, it's such a fascinating topic because you'd like to point fingers, but at the end of the day, it's actually the shipper that is loading people. So it comes from an ICR request, information collection request. Of course, this is dovetailing off of the FMCSA wanting to do another study to see if dwell or detention times are making roads unsafe. So as you're adding these comments, this is what the recent article that was written at FreightWaves. And this is the fun part because they're coming out of the woodwork and there's two sides of the argument. American Trucking Associations and the TIA, which is like cats and dogs, have decided to band together and say, well, this is an economic issue. This is between two parties. We don't need regulation on it. While OIDA, which is Owner Operator Independent Drivers Association, and small fleets and other collections of interest groups are saying, well, this should be regulated because it's so hard for me to collect it and that I'm actually more safe if this occurs. So if I get a load from the broker, they should be on the hook.
So that brings us to the obvious question, and I would ask this normally of a lawyer, but since we don't have a lawyer, I will ask you because that's the second best option. Does OIDA have a case here?
Oh, that's a fun one. I would say I did take, as part of political science, some pre-law classes. So, fun times as well. But by no means would this would be more of a civil issue, it feels like. Unless you can prove that somehow, collect the data, find that there was an accident, find that the driver was obviously fatigued and that they knowingly drove in spite of the fact that they had detention occur. And then you can then pin that to the shipper. It's a can of worms, let's just say, from a legal standpoint. Now, from a persuasion standpoint, safety, tiredness, these are very good persuasive things. And so if you're trying to haggle with a congressperson, hearts and minds always go best. So, I think that there may be legs to it in regards, but at the same time, the problem still remains inefficient shippers, and there's not really a system of accountability. So, we can try to pin this on brokers or carriers, but at the end of the day, unless we try to come up with a system that will identify underperforming shippers and create an incentive to change it, I think that we're really just playing a game of hop.
I think that maybe part of the solution here isn't necessarily pinning the onus on the broker, but pinning the onus and the penalty on the shipper, right? It's always seemed a little kind of contrarian to me that a driver who shows up to a scheduled appointment time and is there on time and is there ready to go gets penalized because of an inability to load them, get them out on time, right? That's always seemed a little bit backwards to me. And it seems like we're getting a step closer in the chain, maybe pointing a finger at the broker, but at the end of the day, as you mentioned, it is in fact the shipper. Part of the argument from these small fleets is the fact that they're saying, okay, these larger fleets and these larger carriers are given preference from our shippers. They're given preference to get in, get out because a broker or a shipper would rather sacrifice a relationship with a small driver than sacrifice a relationship with a mega carrier who they do contracted business with on a regular basis. Is that kind of where the brokerage pulls into this argument, is the fact that they're saying that, hey, brokers are giving your larger carriers preferential treatment, and that's why we're seeing the onus to pay fall down on the smaller guys?
Well, it's kind of a two-part thing. One, the larger incumbent carriers do get priority. That's why they also have trailer pools. They do preload, drop-in hooks. They are going to be loaded. Typically, you're going to load these trailers in bays of reserve, depending upon what needs to go. Live loads always are something you have to juggle around, like you said, with appointment times. And even if the inbound load's delayed, it's unfortunate. But at the end of the day, the shipper is kind of in control because they need things shipped. And because of our boom bust cycle, we're going to hear more of this stuff about detention because carriers are hurting. But on the flip side, this will be fun. I'm going to give you a thought experiment. If the market gets crazy again and there's not enough trucking capacity, what happens when shippers decide to solicit Congress and say that carriers need to be held accountable, and that when they decide to turn down that outbound tender or when they decide to cancel the load last minute because they want a higher rate, should they be held accountable? You see how we get in a situation where Both sides have a pretty good case against the other. At the end of the day, like, there's not really an enforceable mechanism for holding either side accountable. And I do think that these drivers have a point. It is something that fatigue drivers will, when they are delayed, it does cause problems. It causes parking issues. It causes additional cost to the carrier. But until we address the fundamentals, I think if we have carrier 411, we have all of these things that identify bad carriers, but we really don't have that with shippers because of how the relationship is. So I don't mean to kind of punt the question there, but yeah, it's you can make an argument that obviously mega carriers get priority, but mega carriers also are much smarter and they have it automated in terms of their detention, and they're working with a shipper directly, so it's a lot easier to collect compared to your brokers who have to often haggle and they know where they fit within the total.
Never mind the deep pockets there as well. We got a couple minutes left here, Thomas. Wanted to move on to U.S. bank freight payment, noticing that their 5th consecutive decline in spend and freight volumes. Not to be all doom and gloom, but apparently, yes, we're going down again.
5th in a row, correct.
Yes.
A few highlights here. Let me pull up my little sheet. I'm not good at remembering facts on the fly here. Shipments 10%. They fell 10% nationwide year over year. The Western region was the worst, down 23%. Freight spend down 12.5% for the year. Midwest had the worst. So West Coast had the worst decline in volumes, nearing a quarter. And then the Midwest had the worst decline in price, 17.9%. One of the big things that talks about was home building. And I thought this was pretty cool because it does go into the fact that higher interest rates means higher costs, fewer people buying, therefore fewer homes being built. And those homes need things such as furniture, appliances, and all of those are typically truckload orders as well. So we're seeing a pinch. You typically think of the open deck and flatbed with home buying, but also consumers buying things to put in their home with your home goods has another big impact. So that's one of those things that, this data is delayed. It's Q3 now. Obviously, we're in Q4, but it does provide really great insight because we are continuing to see the softness, and it's because there's too much. It's too much capacity. The reason we see spend and volumes down is we're coming off of 2022, which was very, very high. So we have that kind of fundamental difference. But the reason spend is down because, too much competition. Someone will do it cheaper.
Thomas, we're headed into the holiday season and almost no one asks for a new appliance or a piece of furniture for their holiday present, but I'm asking for a dishwasher. So if I single-handedly save the big and bulky market, you're welcome.
Everyone just needs to buy one, and that's the hardest part is consumers, even when they try to finance it, pay attention to seeing if there's any deals on financing, if they're going to try to speed that up, because everyone loves to say the buzzword of destocking, but putting on my little MBA hat, let's look at discounting. Will there be two things I want to see moving into Black Friday? Will we see for real cuts instead of being faked out because they need to clear stuff from last year? And at the same time, if we do see more cuts and discounts for folks to get rid of inventory, are people going to buy it? Are consumers tapped out or not? So look at things like the U.S. bank data. We do see some good stuff with Bank of America spending rates. Look at the credit card providers. They'll normally tell you as well. But it's something that, I hate to sound like a beaten drum here, re-hitting the dead horse, so to speak, but it's truckload capacity driven. Well, you ask a shipper right now, times are great. I don't have to send things in advance. I can wait until the last minute. I can bully my carriers for service. It's a phenomenal time. But brokers and carriers, on the other hand, which is most of our audience, they're going to continue to feel the pain because, unfortunately, there's just too many of them around right now relative to demand.
Well, Thomas, we've got to run at this particular point, but obviously we've got the show coming up on Tuesdays, newsletter coming out, I think, today as well.
Yes, 2 p.m. today for the newsletter. We'll have a special F3 edition of Loaded and Rolling next week. Check it out. I think we'll do it live. It'll be live. It'll be something. It'll be great. A lot of great content coming up as well. Even during F3, you may see me on FreightWaves now. Who knows? Keep an eye out.
All right, Thomas, thanks for that, and we'll talk to you next week. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.